Hey guys, welcome to the video this week, and this week we have another interview. I got a chance to talk with a guy named Mark Hemmings. He's a photography mentor of mine, and he's kind of awesome. Some of the topics we covered is who Mark is and his origin story, Mark Hemmings' new book on iPhone photography, and social media plans for photographers. So, if you're interested in these topics, check out this video. So Mark, what is your, and this is what I like to call, what was your photographer's origin story? How you began and how it progressed?
Yes, well, interestingly enough, your parents would appreciate this because they have spent time in Japan. And the
Hmm.
first time I picked up a camera was prior to a trip to Japan. And that was working for my local university. And it was a film camera because this was back in 97, I think, or 98. And it was a steep learning curve because it was slide film. And slide film is very unforgiving, unlike negative film. And for anyone who's watching that used to use film cameras, whenever you would use slide film, you'd oftentimes be disappointed if you only took one photo and you realized that the exposure was slightly off. You had to be completely accurate. And that was actually very good training for me because it allowed me to really understand exactly what exposure is. Now, the big problem, well, it's not so much of a big problem, but one thing I do notice is that when photographers do start out in the digital age, which of course that would be you and for so many other people, the idea of you know getting proper exposure is very difficult. It's very foreign because the camera is so forgiving and there's so many abilities, so much ability for you to adjust your images either in camera or in Photoshop or post processing. So by learning on film, I was able to get a really good understanding of exposure.
So you're saying that it's harder for newer photographers to learn this?
I would say that it's not harder per se, but newer photographers tend to um, not feel the need. So, I felt the need because every single picture that I took back in the day was $1. So if you think about that, like that's the cost of the film and that's the cost of the processing. Let's say that we got a slide film canister, 24 pictures. It was at least $1 and sometimes $2 if it was professional film per picture. So if you think about that, you're definitely not going to waste your pictures. You're going to learn pretty quickly how to get the proper exposure for very, very difficult scenes.
Well, I'm gonna move on to the next question.
Hmm.
So Mark, I saw that you recently published a book, iPhone Photography for Dummies. You can check that on Mark's website, markhemmings.com. But I would like to know how that came about, how the idea came, and how you went from idea to finished product.
Yeah, certainly. So just a bit of backstory. I tend to flip between genres of photography quite often. And I also work within DSLR, mirrorless, and iPhone. Those are my three types of cameras. For example, I use the Nikon D780. That's for my commercial advertising and night photography work. I use my Fujifilm X-T4. That's for my street photography. And I use my iPhone for whenever I'm walking in the street, don't have any camera, or if I just feel like, I want to capture a nice scene with my iPhone. And I've been doing iPhone photography a lot for the past, almost a decade, actually. I think it was 2012 in Mexico when I first started using my iPhone. Actually, just an interesting point for my listeners is that Levi lived in the same city that I did, San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. And it was San Miguel de Allende where I first picked up or first turned on my camera on my iPhone. And prior to that, I never even really cared about using the camera whatsoever. So anyway, since 2012 all the way to 2017, my Instagram profile was all 100% iPhone. I didn't put any DSLR or any mirrorless photos on it. And I think that was helpful because it sort of established me as a bit of a, what would you say, an expert or at least an authority in iPhone photography. And that led me to work with the very large and successful iPhone Photography School as a teacher, and they are based in Latvia. And then, just because of all of that, I guess you would say, acumen or social media clout, and online, I got an email wonderfully from the For Dummies series company. And they're created by a very large publishing company in the States and international called Wiley Publishing. And they asked me if I was interested in putting together a proposal to see what I would come up with if I was to write a For Dummies book. And by the way, they accepted my proposal and asked me what I would think the name would be. And I would think, well, the simplest thing is iPhone Photography for Dummies, because you always have to have the For Dummies name in their series. So that worked out well. It's been selling extremely well. It's available internationally in every country, I think. Well, at least every country that Amazon sells books online.
That's actually really cool. So they came to you.
Yeah.
Am I right? Mm-hmm. And would you say that's primarily because your Instagram account and then working?
Usually,
Or
yeah, usually in the world of the internet, of course, is what you're getting into, is that it's just a matter of over time, the more content that you produce within a specific genre or a specific activity, then things like Google search engines, they will tend to rank you very well within a search. So if you typed in maybe Mark Hemmings plus iPhone, or maybe just iPhone photography, for example, I may come up on a couple pages. So that is essentially what you want to do starting out, is to create a lot of content, but not to the extent where you're going to burn out, but make sure that you create content within the genre of photography that you really love, and to be consistent. Being consistent is very good. I'll give you an example. I'm quite consistent on my Instagram page. And for example, for any of your followers who are watching, if you go to @MarkHemmings, which is where I'm located, you'll see that almost every second day I post. And that is almost without fail. And that's also not just posting a picture, but posting a lesson. So in the text under the picture is an entire lesson for free every second day. So that takes a lot of work, but I'm consistent. So that's why I usually suggest that don't spread yourself too thin. And usually if you can blast 2 social media channels of your choice and be consistent with it, that'll be good. And that's oftentimes all you have time for. At least, I don't know, you may have more time than others because you're not providing for a family, for example. However, maybe your 2 is YouTube and Instagram, or maybe some people love Twitter and they love Pinterest. So that would be their 2 to promote their work. And if you just pick 2 and stay consistent, then things will move along.
so is this how you grew? Is that what you're saying? You grew by constant consistency and 2 social media platforms?
Yes. So for example, my Facebook page, which is Mark Hemmings Photography, is
Mm-hmm.
I post to that possibly even more than my Instagram. However, this is interesting if anyone's watching who are photographers. The Facebook page doesn't get nearly as much traction, meaning it doesn't go out to the public to draw more people in than Instagram. However, I still get just as much engagement in Facebook. And what that means is that If people want to if they have a question about something, they always feel free to ask me that question or to comment, and that's exactly what I want because I love interacting with people. So, but what I do see is that I would tend to, I may do this after I finish up a huge amount of large projects, is turn my attention back to my Instagram, or sorry, back to my YouTube, because I have so many great things to post that are video. And during COVID lockdown at the beginning in March, at least the beginning for us on the East Coast, every day I would do a Q&A session that was quite popular. And something like
I
that.
remember that.
Yeah.
We came to those. Those were great.
And the very day that COVID restrictions ended for Eastern Canada, for my province, then that's the day then my life as the normal commercial photographer or advertising photographer kicked back into gear. So I had to stop those. However, that's something that I like to restart. So, yeah.
You mentioned, burnout, and I have a question. So this is something I struggle with all the time, and is getting enough content. How do you juggle like having high quality photos, which, I guess it gets easier the better you get, but I'm not always loaded with 6 million photos that I think would be good on Instagram. So how do you juggle high quality images and posting every 2 days?
Yeah, well, for me, it's dependent on where I am in the world. I'll give you an example. If you or anyone scrolls back through my Instagram feed, the last location that you'll see is our beloved San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. And it is so easy to photograph 1 million photos per day, as you would agree, because it's the most beautiful country, a city in the world, possibly. Then prior to that, they were all Japan pictures. That was this past January. It's easy to photograph and to get a whole load of photos when you're traveling. What's hard is in your own hometown, and especially during COVID scenarios like we have now. So that's why I think a couple of weeks ago, I gave myself a challenge. And my challenge was to look at my own city and try to reinvent the way I see my city. And it's been a most amazing journey because I walk up and down the streets now of my own city and I see things that I never saw before. And there's a little bit of pressure, self-imposed pressure, and that's a good thing. And that self-imposed pressure is, Mark, you have every second day you're going to post a picture of your own city, and therefore you get your button gear and you get out there. And even like today, it was below 0 on Celsius. For Americans, it was below freezing. And that means, well, maybe I like being in this cafe, I don't want to go out. It's nice and warm in here. No, I go out and I find something that's very interesting. And that self-imposed pressure, which is a good pressure, is what keeps you creative. And now there are a lot of people who would say, Mark, I don't live in a city, can't do the street photography session that you're doing. No problem. It would be whatever your environment is. And the big excuse is, I live in a place that's not photogenic. Well, I would agree. I would probably disagree, saying that even though it's not what we'd call beautiful, possibly, there's always images to get in any environment that you're in. Now, if you're in an environment that's not beautiful, like San Miguel de Allende, for example, then what you're going to do is you're going to transfer your attention to design-based photos. Now, what's a design-based photo? Well, it's simply you practicing with shapes, with geometric forms, with light, with close-ups, with macro. And what you're going to be doing is simply creating an image that's abstract, that's based on lines, shapes, colors, for example, and do a little bit of history. Like, for example, maybe there is some color around, like neon lights at night. You could practice with that. Or if you're primarily in a suburb, then practice black and white on in the suburban environment. There's just 100 ways to photograph whatever environment you're in.
No, I do feel a tad spoiled. For those who don't know, I'm in the middle of Estes Park, in Colorado, one of the most beautiful places in the world. And I think I've taken photos of the same mountain a few million times because that's right outside my window. But also, while looking back on my work, I see that I progressed the most while living in the most boring places because that's when I had to get the most creative and stretch. I remember I lived in North Carolina, which you think is beautiful, but not in the winter. It's gray and everything's dead. And I grew so quickly because, like, again, like you said, challenging yourself. I did a challenge where I had to take one photo every day for 30 days. And I came up with some weird crap. I'm gonna be honest, there was some weird photos in there that will never see the light of day. But I grew so much. So thanks for sharing that.
Yes, of course.
So I think we can all agree that photography leads you to places unusual. Sometimes because the photographer is crazy. I mean, you end up in crazy situations. And I was curious if you had experiences that, that was created specifically because you had the mindset of taking photos or because of photography?
I've had enormously wonderful encounters in my life as a photographer, and most of them have been travel-based. And for example, if I look back at significant photos, a lot of them would have come from India, for example. And of course, because I'm in Japan a lot and I spend my winters in Mexico, those are two other countries that I have just rafts and rafts of photos that all have very
Mm-hmm.
specific meaning to me because they were born out of an incredibly awesome experience. Now, these awesome experiences are usually derived from interactions with the locals, with those who live there. And I always make sure that my presence in someone's city or village or town is not one-sided. I always give back, whether that be in, spending a lot of money at their restaurants or, their hotels or helping them in some way. So as long as there's an equitable give and take, my presence in someone else's city has value. Now, the worst thing that we could do is, as a tourist photographer or a travel photographer, is to go and take and not give back. And that just produces, animosity, for example. Like there's a lot of photographers who would just, go blast, hundreds of photos and then just leave without any appreciation. You didn't even go to, you didn't go to the museum. You didn't
Mm-hmm.
you didn't do these things that would really enrich your life and of course the life of these people within the other cultures.
Right, we got another question come in by the Mia's kid. Hi, Kenny. And he asks, what would you say is the best way to make money through photography?
Yeah, so it's very important to not be snobbish when you're starting out. You take any job that you can get. And a lot of people would say, oh, I'm not going to do weddings. That's beneath me. No, no, that's not beneath you. In fact, wedding photography is probably the hardest genre of photography that you can do. And I have a high respect for wedding photographers. I don't do it myself, but I there needs to be a great shift of looking down on other genres because of status symbol, and take any job that will give you income to buy the next lens that you need, or to go on that trip to the next state or whatever to get the photos that you need. And eventually,
Mm-hmm.
you build up actual cash especially if this is going to be your career, you have a family important to feed. So I would say be very, very cautious about refusing any paid work.
Here's a follow-up question to that, and this is something I've really been trying to do, but I heard about this concept of, like in your portfolio, you show work that you want to get paid for in the future. So I could, on my Instagram account, spam it with family photos and portraits, and those are easier to make money with, but that's not what I want to do in the future. I want to be a landscape photographer, an adventure photographer, a travel photographer, those kind of things. Did you do that, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so what you do is your website is where you have a diversity of commercial work. Now, the word commercial means work that you're getting paid for. But your Instagram, you would call that your art gallery. So yeah, what you're doing makes perfect sense. On your website, that's where a potential client can go to see your portfolio on food photography, on portraiture, on what else? Sports photography, anything that would traditionally you would get paid for. And I don't think it's necessary, to be honest, to put your artistic or landscape photos on your website. Now, of course you can, but my assumption is that you use something like Instagram to put these awesome artistic creative photos, because usually these days websites have been eclipsed by social media. Now, websites are still the main source where a potential client would look to find your phone number or your email in order to hire you to do a photo shoot. So therefore, your website is where your portfolio of commercial and advertising photos go. If you're wanting to get into wedding photography or family portraiture or maternity photos, all of these genres, you would just do your very best photos on your website, and of course your social media if you're so inclined.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
No problem.
And thank you everyone else for joining.
Yeah. And make sure that for both of us, Due East Photography and Mark Hemmings, that you guys always feel free to comment, to ask questions, and we love to interact with you guys.
Always.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark.
All the best. Bye.
Whoa, every single time I do one of those interviews, I come away with so much more knowledge than I thought I would. So if you like that interview, make sure to click up one of these, I really can't remember which one it is, where I did another interview with a guy named Al Talene, and he talked about some of his crazy stories. But don't worry, Mark Hemmings isn't gone yet, because I actually split our interview into 2 videos. This was only the first one. The second one is over on his channel, Mark Hemmings Photography School. So if you liked this video, you'll definitely like the video over there. Go check that out. Links in the description. And if you haven't already, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. See you next time.